Dragons are terrifying in D&D if you run them right. In this video, I'm going to give you 4 tips to ensure that your dragon encounters are genuinely challenging, exciting boss battles. The most important tip for a challenging dragon battle is very simple. Use their wings. I know that seems obvious, but a lot of DMs will quickly bring their dragon down onto the ground within the reach of the melee fighters, and at that point, the battle is half over. And I think this happens because DMs start with the dragon in the air and then they realize that it's out of the reach of most of the players and they panic that this isn't going to be a fun battle. So they bring the dragon down to try and get everyone involved, but that just makes things too easy. An effective dragon stays in the air until it has a really good reason not to. In the air, it's obviously protected from melee fighters on the ground, and it can maneuver very quickly around the map. Dragons have a lot more speed flying than they do walking, so up in the air they can maneuver in ways that the players just can't. Maybe the wizard has been left up at the back of the room unprotected, so the dragon jumps up into the air, cuts across the map without triggering any opportunity attacks, and swoops down to attack the wizard. Of course, the ultimate power move of a dragon is to soar overhead, far out of reach of the players, raining its breath weapon down upon them. But even on turns when the breath weapon has not recharged, the dragon still has great options. For example, a lot of dragons have a bite attack, which is at least 10 foot, and that means they can swoop down, make an attack, and then withdraw without taking an attack of opportunity from, say, a melee fighter with a longsword and a 5-foot reach. Now, with the dragon airborne, does that mean the players don't stand a chance? Well, no. But it does mean they have a problem and they need to solve it, and solving problems is what good D&D is all about. The players are going to have to plan ahead, strategize, and work together in combat to deal with that dragon, and if they do that properly, they will be able to take it down. It just won't be as easy as if the dragon inexplicably landed during the first couple of rounds. Obviously, the reason that DMs often bring the dragon down too early is that they're worried about the melee fighters standing around with nothing to do. But the cool thing about keeping a dragon airborne is that it gives the support-focused spellcasters a chance to be really useful, giving magical buffs and enhancements to the melee fighters to allow the melee fighters to get up high enough to attack the dragon. These could be spells that enhance jumping, give them flight or levitation. These are things that the spellcasters might not get to use normally that are now going to be crucially important in evening the playing field. Of course, there's also a wide range of magic items that allow for flight, from winged boots to flying carpets, broomsticks, and all the rest, and if the players plan ahead, as they probably should if they're going up against a dragon, they can acquire some of these items, allowing the melee fighters to swoop through the air, fighting the dragon high above the battlefield. When designing the dragon's lair, you can include raised platforms and walkways. A heroic player could scramble up onto one of these and leap off into thin air, risking terrible fall damage to try and grab onto the dragon. Then, if they succeed clinging onto the dragon, they can start landing devastating attacks. This is a thrilling, dramatic moment that you just wouldn't get if the players weren't having to problem solve, if the dragon just forgot it could fly. You can also homebrew a rule that will allow the players to eventually force the dragon onto the ground in the latter portion of the battle. For example, a player could take a -10 penalty to their attacks, but specifically target the dragon's wings, and if they deal enough damage to the wing tissue, the dragon will eventually be forced onto the ground. Perhaps first its speed is cut down to half, and then it drops to the ground where the melee fighters can rush in and start to attack it. Again, a player-driven solution to the problem, rather than the DM solving the problem by just bringing the dragon down early. Again, this is a simple tip, but always try to use the dragon's breath weapon to target multiple players at once. The dragon's breath weapon won't always recharge, so when you deploy it, it should be done for maximum effect, not just to hit whoever happens to be closest. Now, the wrong way to use a breath weapon is to target a single character, because if that character passes their saving throw, they might take half damage, or potentially if they have a certain class feature, they might take no damage at all, and you've just wasted that breath weapon that won't come back for several rounds potentially. Now, obviously there may be exceptions to this rule. There might be a particularly badass moment where a player is going 1v1 with the dragon and you want to unleash the breath weapon against them. I'm not talking about those situations. I'm talking about situations where it's early in the fight and you want to put the fear of God into your players. In that case, you want to try to line up that breath weapon so it hits, I'd say, at least 3 players, if not more. Remember, dragons are intelligent warriors. They're not mindless animals, except for maybe the white dragon, who doesn't seem to be the sharpest tool in the shed, but everyone else seems pretty sharp. So don't let your dragon just impulsively unleash the breath weapon. They have all this speed because of their flight, so they can maneuver around the battlefield to find the perfect angle to catch as many players as possible. If it's an appropriate breath weapon, they might try to target some of the environment around the players. Maybe a couple of the players are standing on a wooden platform, so the red dragon unleashes its fire breath on the platform, not only targeting as many players as possible, but setting the platform ablaze. Another important thing to remember here is that just because the breath weapon has recharged doesn't mean you have to use it right away. It recharges and it sits there ready to go. So if it takes a couple of rounds to find the perfect alignment for the attack, do that. You can even terrify your players by describing the breath weapon kind of crackling inside the dragon's mouth as it builds back up, or you can keep them in suspense. You roll the recharge die behind your screen and you don't give anything away, and the players never know if it's this turn or next when that breath weapon finally returns. Now obviously this is going to make your dragons a lot more effective in combat, but it's also going to incentivize the players to be clever and strategic in their placement on the battlefield. Maybe one player sees that their friend has gone down to death saving throws and they've got a healing potion. They could run over and administer it, but two players together could be enough to tempt the dragon into targeting them both. So now they have to work out what the best approach is here. Players have to spread themselves out on the map to avoid giving the dragon too easy a time of it. And now you've got your players thinking about something other than just dealing damage, and for me that's always a win. By the way, I do not have a sponsor for this video, and that's okay because thankfully I've got some wonderful people who back me over on my Patreon and make all of this possible. When you join the Tales of Arcane Patreon, you get access to more than 1,000 pages of my original homebrew content, and if you want to try before you buy, you can actually grab my most recent travel encounter totally free. If you follow my Patreon as a free subscriber rather than joining one of the paid tiers, you can download this 6-page PDF that gives you a little mini adventure where your players take on a horrifying giant from Scottish folklore. It's got some fantastic artwork by the Dragon's Vault, and again, totally free. There's a link to my Patreon down below this video. As with all boss battles, minions are a great addition, especially for dragons. If all the players are up first and the dragon's at the bottom of the initiative order, it could still take a huge beating before it ever gets to land a blow. Now, in the case of young dragons that don't yet have legendary resistances, they're also just as vulnerable as a lot of other monsters to spells that might take them out of combat early. The solution to all these problems: minions. With minions on the battlefield, your players are more likely to split their firepower between multiple targets rather than focusing everything on the dragon. Minions can also run up to the players and create a flanking situation, giving the dragon more effective attacks. And most importantly, minions can break concentration. They might not be dealing a huge amount of damage, but if the players have taken the dragon out early with some kind of subduing spell, then the minions can rush in, deal a bit of damage, and potentially break the dragon out. Now, the great thing about dragons is that within the lore of D&D, it makes perfect sense that they would have minions. Dragons are usually big, egotistical personalities, so of course they want people looking up to them, fighting for them, serving them in their lair. A red dragon could have a gang of kobolds that live in the lair, fight for them, and maybe even look up to them as a kind of deity. A blue dragon, cunning, charismatic, might forge alliances with a nearby human settlement, might have a gang of human warriors defending the lair. An adult or even a young dragon could have wormlings, freshly hatched, and now ready to stand between the players and their ultimate prize. Again, dragons are intelligent creatures, so they know how to use minions in combat. They'll take on the role of a general, swooping overhead, unleashing their breath weapon, and ordering their minions into the fray below. I would always recommend, for multiple reasons, don't let your dragon fight alone. Now, this one won't apply to every dragon battle because circumstances vary, but in most cases, if the players are fighting the dragon in its lair, logically the lair should favour the dragon. The dragon picked this place for a reason, and even if the lair was originally built by someone else, maybe a red dragon has occupied an abandoned dwarven fortress, the dragon's probably been here long enough to make some renovations. First things first, and going back to tip 1, the lair should give the dragon room to fly. If the dragon picked this place, and the dragon knows that it's strongest in the air, it's going to be looking for big, wide hallways, high ceilings, plenty of room to get way out of the range of any potential attackers. A dragon is almost never going to have a lair that's a small, cramped space that doesn't allow for it to fly. Even the blue dragon, which creates tunnel networks underground, will be creating larger chambers and hallways where it will spend its time. Most dragons are also smart enough to know that a lair without a good back door is a death trap waiting to happen. The players might have to go through narrow, kobold-infested tunnels to get into the lair, but the dragon should have its own, probably flight-based escape route. Or, if the dragon can breathe underwater, it could be a submerged passage leading out of the dragon's lair. The dragon will know that although it is likely to be able to take on anyone who gets into the lair, there's always the possibility that it will be overwhelmed, and in that case it needs to get out. Now, in many cases this might just be a big hole in the ceiling at the top of the mountain, inaccessible from the outside, but for the dragon very easy to escape through. As I say, other dragons, depending on their particular resistances and abilities, might have alternative routes, but when designing that exit route, think of a way to make it that the players are going to find it harder to follow the dragon through there, because that's probably a prerequisite of a good exit route. Each dragon also has damage immunities, usually based on its breath weapon, and these should be factored in when designing the lair to give the dragon a natural advantage. For example, a green dragon, immune to poison damage, might have a lair in a swamp thick with poisonous gas that the players are going to have to navigate through or come with some kind of protective gear to deal with. A red dragon will of course have rivers of lava, walls of flame burning throughout their lair, and this means that they're going to be able to move freely in a way that the players won't be. The players are dodging around these dangerous fire hazards while the dragon is cutting back and forth without restriction. Now the lair itself becomes a challenge, and the combat encounter as a whole will be more difficult because the dragon has advantages that the players do not. But what's great is that the players will now be rewarded if they think ahead, if they plan, they prep for this encounter properly. If they get that armor of acid resistance before they go into the black dragon's lair, the field will be a little bit more even, and they will be able to take on the dragon in a way they couldn't have if they just rushed in without thinking about the environment. Again, problems, solutions. A dragon battle doesn't come along every day, but when it does, I hope the tips in this video will make that battle all the more challenging and epic for you and for your players. Thank you for watching, thank you to everyone who supports me over on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next video.